And hello, everyone. Thanks for watching. I'm David Hopper, Austin Bureau Chief of 360degreesound.com. Over the last 5 years, we've been doing a series called Author Talk, where we bring readers and viewers exclusive interviews with authors of new music-related books. Today, I'm joined by Cleveland-based music journalist Annie Zaleski, author of the new book, Taylor Swift, The Stories Behind the Songs. There it is.
Yay.
Annie is also the author of illustrated biographies on Lady Gaga and Pink, and she's the author of Duran Duran's Rio for Bloomsbury's 33 and a Third series. You can find our interviews with Annie for all those books on 360degreesound.com. Annie, welcome back to 360. Thanks for joining us to talk about your new book on the songs of Taylor Swift.
Absolutely. Thank you for always having me.
Of course. So it's an ambitious task, writing about every song by Taylor Swift. She's been a very prolific songwriter since she first hit the scene with their debut single, Tim McGraw, nearly 20 years ago. Um, just please start by telling us how this book came to be.
So a couple years ago now, I got approached by a UK publisher who was looking for someone to write a book on Taylor. And I had written about Taylor fairly extensively, done reviews and things like that. And so they somehow found me and I ended up talking to them, and I was sort of like, you want me to do a book on Taylor Swift? Okay, how soon do you need it, basically? It was so I am such a fan of her work. And so it was just a real joy to kind of dig into everything she's ever done.
Hmm. Yeah. So there's so many, all of her songs, so it's a lot to choose from. But I guess what would be an example of a Taylor Swift song that you thought had a particularly interesting backstory?
Oh, geez. So many of them. I mean, I think one of my favorite Taylor Swift songs is The Last Great American Dynasty from Folklore. And the great thing about that is that, I mean, for long story short, there's a whole bunch of different stories to it. She bought a house in Rhode Island, and it happened to be owned by this really fascinating woman named Rebecca Harkness. And so she sort of, and like her life story, like she was, married to different people. Like she had these fabulous parties, but she was also an aspiring musician. And so when Taylor bought the house, she like learned all about Rebecca and ended up, doing like becoming sort of an expert on her life. So she sort of wrote this song, kind of lightly fictionalizing some details from it about Rebecca having, this marvelous time ruining everything and just having these amazing sort of parties. And then she sort of twists the song and talks about herself because she bought the house. And, I had the opportunity to kind of dig into a little bit to Rebecca's real life, and I dug up some amazing stuff. It just, you could see why Taylor was really sort of gravitated toward her. She was just a real character. And so, reading about that and just kind of digging in more a little bit about it, really kind of illustrated the detail that goes into Taylor's songwriting and just what sort of a brilliant song that is.
Yeah.
But so many different songs. I mean, my goodness, she's, written songs about like, Enchanted is involving Owl City, the singer, if people remember that group. She kind of struck up a friendship with the lead singer Adam, for an example. And so they kind of had, she wrote a song, sort of about meeting him, and then he wrote a song in response. And so there were just a lot of just really great stories. I mean, so many.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Yeah, you go through all the songs in chronological order, so you're covering all of her different eras. Um, when you look at it, when you zoom back and look at how she's evolved as a songwriter, what are some of the things you've seen? How are some ways you've seen like maybe her songwriting mature or change over the years?
I mean, I think first on just a surface level, musically, she's really, obviously, I think, she's evolved from, she was pretty straight up country music at the start. And then over time has really come to embrace a lot of different genres, definitely sort of mainstream pop music, but also a little bit more folk music, electronic music, straight up rock music. And in recent times, I think, she's settled into this kind of, modern pop groove that has, like I said, folk flourishes, electronic flourishes, and, all sorts of different things, indie rock, I guess. And so that's very obvious. Just from a writing standpoint, the sophistication was really, really evident. When she started off, she was so young. She was writing about what she knew, which was a lot about her life as a teenager, things she was going through. And you really see her start to kind of deepen as a songwriter and sort of, not only just look back at her younger self and some of the songs she wrote and almost having conversations with herself about them. She uses a lot of the same imagery throughout, so there's a real cohesion to it. But, she kind of dabbled in fiction a little bit too, and more kind of storytelling, in terms of making these rich characters. I mentioned folklore before. There are some really just wonderful sort of story songs on folklore and Evermore. And and just kind of and being, I think, more honest, and I think just the things she was talking about as well. I think of a song like Anti-Hero, which is one of her newer era songs. And she's talking a lot about depression and feeling insecurity and sort of, self-loathing and anxiety. And so those are like very adult, kind of sophisticated things, you maybe don't necessarily hear in a lot of pop songs. And she's really kind of embracing that vulnerability. So, but it was just so striking, just seeing her growth. And when you actually listen to her entire catalog, kind of from front to back, you just really see the progression. And it's just a real, it's a real delight to see.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. You bring up Anti-Hero. That was the next question I was going to ask about because
Yes.
that was one of her biggest hits. So spent
Yeah.
eight weeks at number one. I was going to ask what you thought about her lyrics in that song that
Yeah.
resonated with people. Do you think it was a lot of her talking about her being so vulnerable and talking about her depression and things like that?
Definitely. And I mean, I think the whole the chorus, hi, it's me, I'm the problem, it's me. I mean, first off, that's exceedingly catchy. But second off, I think it's really relatable to a lot of people. When you're sort of at your lowest moments and you're just feeling like, oh, I can't get anything done, or I'm just really having a hard time, you really get stuck on it's my problem. It's not the world's problem, like something is wrong with me. And, that's kind of a deceptively cheery thing. She really kind of framed it as this, was especially you see it live, she's waving to the audience, but there's a real layer of kind of sadness and a little bit of definite sadness and sort of not really sarcasm, but there's definitely it's a very interesting, it's a lot more layered than you might think. And I think when she's talking about, in the middle, basically being in the middle of the night and, having these doubts, like it is just a really, I think it's a deceptively cheerful song. I think it's one of those, in recent years that has been sort of a theme as well. I Can Do It with Broken Hearts, another one where she's talking about these really sad, difficult moments in her life, and it's these really upbeat pop songs. And when you look back, there's such a tradition of that. I mean, I think of something like the Smiths, and obviously Taylor's music is nothing like the Smiths, but they wrote all these really upbeat songs with these really morose lyrics. And she's kind of dabbling a little bit of that as well. So, but as you might tell, I love Anti-Hero, and so I have a lot to say about it. I think it's a brilliant song.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great observation. Heaven knows I'm miserable now would be an example of a Smith song. Very, very catchy
Right.
melody, but not so much lyrically. But yeah, that is interesting how Swift has kind of carried that on. Um, yeah, you write early on in the book that one of the misconceptions about Swift, among people who don't really know her music, will say she's always writing about her breakups and her exes will inevitably be the subject of a song. This book, of course, proves that's inaccurate. But what do you think is maybe another common misconception about Swift?
I think it's funny that the misconception still lingers that maybe that she is not very much in control of her music. And I think it's not as much as it used to be. I think when she was starting off, people definitely were like, oh, you're not writing your own songs, and so there was that misconception. I think people still don't necessarily respect the fact that how driven she is and how, those are her songs. She is writing these songs, even though she works very closely with people like Jack Antonoff and Aaron Dessner. Like she's driving the bus on that, and she really thrives on collaboration and always has in her career. When you kind of look at it, she's always worked with, maybe one or two people, and it's always been, and that's where she's really written some of her best songs, is having, her writing songs and having that collaborator to kind of bounce things off of. So I think that's a misconception. I think people just, it's interesting, especially because the Eras tour was so huge. Um, people just like to cut her down, just for just being herself in general, even though, she's very philanthropic, she's very charitable, she is extremely generous, and people still like just are sort of like, are kind of disdainful for her toward her. And I think part of that is when someone is really, really successful, people always look for a way to sort of cut them down. And so I think you get that a little bit. But I don't know, I mean, she really does musically like wear her heart on her sleeve, and that was very obvious, and you can see why, how irritating it is when people were like, "Oh, all you do is write about your ex-boyfriends." When reading any of the lyrics from any of her songs, you can see that she's writing about her feelings. She's writing about what she's going through. She's more, centering herself and experiences, and maybe they're about guys, maybe they're about something else. And it's a lot more than that. It's very reductive just to see her as one thing.
Hmm. Sure. Uh, yeah, your book's very well cited. You have a lot of quotes from Swift from,
Mhm.
various interviews over the years. Wonder if you could talk kind of generally about what she said about interviews about her songwriting process, like in terms of how her songs come together for
Yeah, it's interesting because I think for her, she doesn't talk about process as much as I think other people. And I will say that I think it's very evident she does not do a lot of interviews at this point. She very rarely talks to the press anymore. And I think because she's sort of like how she's reached a point she doesn't need to. And so we don't necessarily get a lot of the process interviews for recent times. What we do get, which is actually very interesting, is she talks a little bit about her songwriting. And I honestly, I think that's really interesting because, she's not talking about the nuts and bolts of, oh, I recorded this then and things like that. She's talking more about, how the lyrics came together or what she was thinking when she sort of did that. You get a lot of the process stuff from maybe some of her studio collaborators, in terms of, they talk a little bit more about what it's like to actually record with her. Every so often she'll talk about like, oh, I got sent this and I wrote this really fast and sent it back. Aaron Dessner has talked a lot about in recent times about, he had an idea, sent it to her, and she sent something back within like 30 minutes or something ridiculous like that. And so you kind of get those glimpses into it. But what I really like is that she's more specific than you might think about the inspirations between, especially a lot of her earlier songs. What she used to do on her website is she used to kind of go track by track by every song on her album. And so you could go back and it's off the website now. If you use the Internet Archive, you can go back and find them. But she basically laid out like, oh, I wrote about this, I was in math class and I wrote this. This was about a friend of mine. And so you really got a fairly straightforward glimpse into especially her early work about, what she was sort of thinking at the time. So, and honestly, that stuff is really interesting. And that really sort of deepens the impact of her songs. It doesn't diminish it by knowing what she was thinking about when she was sort of coming up with everything, which is actually like really hard to do because sometimes, if people give everything away, then there's no mystery left. But, she talks about, what her songs are about to her. And then, people are able to sort of jump off of it and, find their own kind of inspiration and resonance in them.
hmm. Yeah. Well, as you said, she doesn't really give many media interviews now, but if you were able to interview her, particularly about some of her newer music,
Mhm.
which she hasn't really, explained as much, I guess what would be maybe a newer song you'd like to ask her about, and what would you ask her?
Oh man. I mean, I love Clara Clara Bow. I can't remember, is it Bow or Bow? I can't remember, but I love that song. Like, so that is a song, and obviously, that's another one with a really rich backstory. Clara was an actress, and she mentioned Stevie Nicks in the song, and that was another one where she's mentioning all of these women throughout history, and then kind of brings it back to herself. And so, I would love to know more about like how did you come up with that? How did you land on Clara? Like, what was your inspiration? Who sort of introduced you to her? And how did you come on with the Stevie Nicks little bit? I think that one, for sure. And then You're on Your Own, Kid. That song really became such a phenomenon because of the line about friendship bracelets. I think, the Eras Tour, people started making friendship bracelets and trading them. And that just became a phenomenon that is bled over into other concerts and other artists. There was just something about like, where did you come up with that? How did that song kind of come together? Because that's another just really heartbreaking song in terms of, trying to find your place in the world and figure out what you need to, what you want to be and what how you need, what you have to do to get there. And so I think those probably two songs. but also so high school. I just love the sound of that. Like if she could make a record that was sort of, it sounds kind of like Soccer Mommy and like modern indie rock. And I'm like, boy, I would love an entire record of that from her. Like that would be, I think a lot of people have wanted her to, indulge her not so inner emo fan because, she's a big fan of the kind of the mid 2000s emo movement, and just her doing kind of a rock album like that, I think would go over really, really well because I think she's just she's really natural at that too.
Yeah, absolutely, and probably bring on more, even more fans with that. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, um, yeah. Yeah, we've talked a lot about some specific songs. I was wondering if you had a favorite Swift era, and or maybe you can't pick one, but I guess what one of her eras that you found particularly intriguing?
So I have always loved red, and that did not change from doing the book. I think, that was sort of the dividing line, I guess you would say, of her, being sort of, she was, it was like the record before she really kind of jumped headfirst into pop. Red had a lot of, she worked with Shellback and Max Martin on that. So she definitely had those, super pop, going for the brass ring moments. But it was a really diverse record. It had some rock on there. The title track was just a really kind of a driving song. There's some other songs on there a little bit more folk leaning. And it's a really long record. Obviously, All Too Well is on that, which is such, just an absolute, iconic song in her catalog at this point. And so I just think that her songwriting was really honest at that point. And I think musically it was really an eclectic record and it all hung together really well. I saw her on that tour and it was such a great tour anyway. But then I also like folklore. I think folklore, the songwriting on that, I just really love. They're like little mini kind of fictional vignettes throughout. And I think the music on that as well just really, really suits her. It was definitely a progression and something that was definitely different, but it just really, really worked for her. And I think that really kind of helped her get to where she is now making that record. And so I think those are my two favorites that I still go back to. But I like all, I mean, I think, all of her eras are good. Her quality control is such that she has really never made a bad song. Maybe she's made some songs that haven't aged so well that are like, oh, maybe I'll skip them. But yeah, like her ratio to good songs to bad songs is like off the charts. She is, it's really impressive. And listening to it all, it really stands out because I mean, you can't really say that about a lot of bands. There's always artists that have these, clunky records or clunky eras that you're just like, oh, it did not work for them. And she really doesn't have that. And so it's really impressive.
Mm, absolutely, and yeah, it's just so prolific, and yeah, just really one album after another. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm assuming she's a fast writer, and like you said, she's had some great
Yeah.
collaborators as well. But I guess it's another general question. What do you think it is that makes her so special as a
Mhm.
songwriter? Like what does she do that just kind of puts her in the the top
Yeah.
of her era? So,
I mean, I think, when she was starting off, she was a teenager writing about teenage things. And that was not common. I think it's hard to remember now that how absolutely novel that was, especially in, obviously in country music, there had definitely been some younger artists, like we talked about Leanne Rimes, who was very popular in the 90s when she was a very young teenager. Taylor, of course, was a fan of hers. But just the fact that she was writing the songs herself and writing about her own experiences and talking to her fans was unbelievably novel. And she's really kind of kept up that over the years. She's sort of been in an almost 20-year conversation with her fans in a way. Um, but she just really captures, a very specific emotional things that people are going through in a way that very, very few people have, and it's very personal, but it's also very universal at the same time. And that is not easy to do. She's writing these lyrics and these quips that, people can relate to at different times in their life. And, in her songs, you can grow with her songs. And I think that's another thing too, that, a lot of, fans who maybe, were teenagers when they started listening to her now have kids. And so their younger generations are listening to her as well. And I think that's also a difference that, you can definitely see a lot of the younger listeners of like, I think Love Her Forward, I think has really brought in a lot of other people. And so she also just has a really like, astounding ability to, keep her old fans and bring new ones in. That's also not easy to do. And I think that is a testament to her songwriting, that she's really kind of grown with, uh, you know, she's obviously grown up and her songwriting has grown up. She's really writing about things she's going through now. And so the fact that she's, not trying to sort of replicate what she did before, but also continue to move forward and take risks and do other things. That's also a difference as well. I think that really distinguishes her because, people can always count on her trying to do something new and go in a new direction. And you're never quite sure where she's going to go next. And it's, and that's, you can't say that about a lot of artists. So, yeah, I think there's so many reasons though, she's a real, a once in a lifetime sort of artist.
Mhm. All right. Yeah, the book is Taylor Swift, the stories behind the songs. It's for sale now. I get yeah, Annie, I guess finally just what would be your pitch for Swifties who may be interested in picking up this book?
So I guarantee you that you will probably learn something you didn't know, even if you think you know everything. But it's a real celebration of her catalog. This is definitely it mentions the tabloids a little bit, but it's absolutely about her music and how she wrote the songs, why she wrote the songs, how they came together, and it's a real it really honors that too. It's definitely trying to give her respect as a songwriter and really underscore, kind of like what you asked, like why she is such a generation talent.
Mhm.
And it has cute pictures too. I forgot that.
Yeah,
It's lovely. It's illustrated, it has lots of full color, high quality photos as well.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Really enjoyed it myself. Yeah, make sure you pick it up, everyone. Thanks so much, Annie, for speaking with
Thank,
us.
thank you so much for
Yeah,
having me.
take care. Bye.